Thank you for that. Um, yeah, just thinking about this broad conversation, the broad topic, and I'm sure we'll get into much more specificity. But in terms of we're thinking about death and loss and the kind of emotions and affects that it brings along in terms of grieving and mourning, and the ways in which we as human beings attempt to make sense of that, or to make sense of life after loss or life in the midst of loss, and the ways in which we often don't have adequate frameworks to talk about that, and the ways in which we like to deny death, or to deny or to imagine our own immortality or longevity. And yet when we're faced with death, we look for explanatory systems to help us make sense of them. And religion certainly is one of those places where we turn to get the languages and the cosmologies and the frameworks in which to make meaning out of loss and death and grief and suffering and those experiences. And so religion offers us this meaning making system to help us to bear up under the burden of loss and grief and death. But it also provides us with the kind of ritual practices of community and care to help to sustain us, and to create communities of care and nurture, also within the midst of our grieving and mourning. So that's one way, I think, to think about this relationship at a broad level between the mediation, religion as a mediating factor, in terms of how it mediates our experiences with loss and grief and death. But that's the most positive reading of it, right? And I don't know how quickly we jump into the other side of things, but certainly we can think about the ways that religion facilitates loss and death and grief in very real ways, right? And so, certainly for me as one who teaches African-American culture and history, the ways in which religion becomes a facilitator and a justificatory system for the loss of life, or an explanatory system that downplays the significance of certain lives being lost and grieved and the like. And so, or the ways that religion plays a function in creating other forms of loss outside of death, the loss of community and loss of connection and loss of any number of sets of relationships that people are grieving precisely because of the workings of religion in their family, or because of their identities, marginalized in many different ways. And so we think about a multiple set of possibilities that religion plays out, or connections that religion has with loss and grief, that I'm sure that we'll continue to unpack as we have our conversation here together.